Welcome back, viewers. You are with me, Dr. Surbhi Unyal, and I teach philosophy at the School of Liberal Arts, Bennett University. So, we are doing a lecture on Indian knowledge system and specifically focusing on the theory of karma. In the previous lecture, we were discussing that what is karma, what is the history of karma, and how the notion of karma has evolved from being a ritualistic karma to being a moral causation. And now we are discussing the fact that how karma and rebirth are interrelated. So, the doctrine of karma, where we have discussed that it is intimately related to the concept of samsara, creating a relationship so essential that karma cannot function coherently as a ethical framework without rebirth as its complementary principle. So, herein we see that how this metaphysical principle, how that is necessarily linked with the idea of samsara and rebirth. So, we often encounter scenarios where individuals engaged in unethical conduct or unethical experience and they experience prosperity and happiness, while those pursuing virtuous paths, they endure suffering, hardships, pain, disease and so many problems in their life. So, such apparent moral congruity or finds resolution through the temporal expansion provided by the past and future incarnations. So, we often are we often reflect onto the idea that how someone who is performing or is indulged in an unethical conduct, still that person is prospering in the life or is happy and having a great life, while those who seem to be or who are considered to be virtuous, they are in fact enduring a lot of pain and suffering. And this can be explained by the moral causation of how the temporal expansion has provided the past and the future incarnations. So, the current prosperity that a person who is indulged in an unethical conduct is enjoyed maybe because he or she is reaping the fruits of the virtuous actions performed in previous existences, while simultaneously their present transgression accumulate karmic consequences destined to manifest in subsequent lifetimes. So, we might be observing them to be having a happy and prosperous life while they are indulged in unethical conduct. And that can be explained because the current prosperity that they are enjoying is because of the virtuous actions that they have performed in the previous existences. But what they are doing now, what they are doing in the present life, that is being accumulated, and this karmic consequences will be manifested in the subsequent lifetimes. So, the notion of samsara, mukti, rebirth, they are closely connected with the doctrine of karma. This connection is logical rather than merely dogmatic one. So, it goes as if action must produce consequences for their doer. So, those who are doing that action, so the action must produce consequences for their doer. Next is, some consequences cannot manifest within a single lifetime. So the consequences cannot transfer to another person. Then the continuity of individual beyond death becomes metaphysically necessary. So rebirth isn't simply a religious belief, but a logical implication of the karma theory. So why a soul rebirths? This idea of rebirth can be logically linked and can have a logical implication of the karma theory, because one individual is performing an action, but not all all the consequences cannot manifest in a single lifetime. But we have also mentioned that for every action that you perform, it will have a subsequent consequence, because there is a causal link in them. So there is a cause and effect relationship there, and this cause and effect relationship is so strong that even if in this life one is not able to bear the consequences of the actions performed, then those consequences will manifest in another life, because they cannot be transferred. So what I have done, I cannot ask somebody else to bear the consequences of what I have done, because my life is so short that I am not able to reap the consequences of my actions in this lifetime. So I transfer it to someone else who would then bear the consequences of my actions. That can also not happen. So therefore, this shows that that there is a continuity of an individual even beyond the physical death of the body, and this becomes a metaphysical necessity. So rebirth therefore is not a dogmatic religious belief. It can then be seen as a logical implication of this karma theory. Let us briefly discuss the theory of karma across various Indian philosophical traditions. If we talk about Nyaya Vaisheshik, according to them, karma creates an unseen force, adrishta, that inheres in the soul. Sankhya Yoga mentions that actions leave subtle impressions called samskar that manifests as future experiences. Mimamsakas, for them, they have emphasized on ritualistic actions. So ritual actions, they generate an invisible potency which is called apurva, that must eventually actualize. So since Mimamsakas, their focus was on rituals and sacrifices, therefore they see karma to be the ritualistic karmas, and they say that these ritual karmas, they generate invisible potency, or which is known as apurva, and that must eventually actualize. Talking about Vedanta, multiple interpretations can be talked about in Vedanta because of the sub-schools. So ranging from karma as ultimately illusory by the Advait, to karma as divine justice by the Dvait. So in Advait philosophy, as systematized by Shankaracharya, their liberation cannot be achieved through actions or karma alone, regardless of how virtuous or how ritually perfect those actions might be. This is because karma, by its nature, operates within the realm of duality and causality, while moksha represent transcendence from every kind of duality. Then if I talk about Buddhism, so Buddha he explained karma in the light of pratitya samutpad, which is the dependent origination. This distinctive approach rejects an unchanging self, which is the Atman, that transmigrates. It emphasizes intention, which is Chetna, as the essence of karma and places karma within a complex causal matrix of 12 interdependent links. So, the 12 causal link which Buddhism talks about, and therein they are emphasizing on intention, which is as the essence of karma, and then karma is placed within this complex causal link. According to Buddhism, attachment is the cause of all miseries, and liberation comes through ending attachment. Buddha's statement that whatever we are is because of the past action acknowledges karma while reframing it within dependent origination. Let us now talk about the Jain tradition. So, the Jain tradition offers perhaps the most literal interpretation of karma. So, karma is conceived as actual subtle particles, which is karma pudkal. These particles adhere to the soul according to the actions performed. So, liberation requires exhausting these accumulated karmas and preventing new influx. So, they have given extreme emphasis on non-violence, which is ahimsa, to minimize karmic accumulation. So, these are the views that they hold, and all Indian traditions they recognize that true spiritual fulfillment lies in transcending the cycle of karma and rebirth. As we discussed in the earlier section, that mukti liberation is closely connected to the karma doctrine. Then different paths, but we have also seen that in order to be liberated, there are different paths that one can adopt, and different philosophers, different Indian philosophical traditions have emphasized on different types of paths. So, different paths to liberation they include Gyan Marg, which is knowledge, realizing one's true nature beyond the karmic identity. Herein, it is through the knowledge through which one gets liberated. Bhakti Marg, devotion, which is surrendering the fruits of actions to the divine. So, here in this path, it is through the bhakti to the divine that one gets liberated. So, surrendering the fruits of actions to the divine would ultimately lead to liberation. Talking about karma marg, which is actions. Here, performing actions without attachment to results is what is the focus, or is the way to be liberated. Bhagavad Gita synthesizes these approaches with its doctrine of Nishkam Karma, which is desireless actions. So, you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of actions. What one is entitled, or what one is prescribed to do, is the duty, while we are not entitled to the fruits of the actions. So, one must not be concerned on the fruits of the actions. In fact, one must perform an action because that is what is one's duty. And this idea is called Nishkam Karma. So it represents a central ethical principle in Indian philosophy that distinguishes between actions that bind us to rebirth and those that lead to liberation. So these actions are basically, if we talk about how we distinguish different types of actions, how those actions would lead us to liberation. So if the action is a desireless action which is done because one is ought to do those actions out of one's duty and not concerned about the consequences that are going to follow, or the fruits that we are going to bear from those actions, that would then lead to liberation. So that is the path of liberation. But if one is focused on the results of those actions, then those would bind us to this cycle of birth and rebirth. So actions performed with conscious desire for personal gain create karmic entanglements that perpetuate the cycle of rebirth, while those performed without attachment to results gradually free one from those bonds. So that shows that being attached to the results of the action would bound oneself. So one need to be free from these kinds of attachments to the results, because we do not have control over the results. We only have control over the action, but we can never control what consequences would follow from those actions. And that has been discussed elaborately in Bhagavad Gita, that one should relinquish attachment to the fruits of actions, not only because desire creates bondage, but fundamentally because the results themselves lie outside the actor's legitimate domain. They remain entirely within the divine control. So if we have no control over the result and the consequences, why should we be concerned and why should we be attached to those results? Bhagavad Gita mentions that we have control only over our actions, and these actions, if one get attached to the results of those actions, it would not just create bondage, but it would lead, it would lead to nowhere, because the actor, the person who is performing an action, has no control. So it would remain entirely within the divine control, and one never has control over what consequences would follow from a particular kind of action. This perspective, it reframes the renunciation of results as a recognition of the cosmic order. It says that why fixate on what was never within your authority? So Gita therefore elevates Nishkam Karma to a practice of divine surrender, instructing that one should perform all actions with complete offering to God. Because why would you be concerned or fixate on what was never in your authority nor or your control? So one should surrender, one should perform an action and surrender it to the God, that whatever consequences would follow would be out of the divine will and not the individual will. So the text states that he who works, having given up attachment, resigning his actions to God, is not touched by sin, even as a lotus leaf is untouched by water. So this beautifully explains that the person who is performing an action and has given up attachment to the consequences of those actions and resigning his actions to God, so that person is not touched by sin. Even when we talk, just like how we talk about a lotus leaf which is untouched by water. So this principle appears centrally in Krishna's guidance to Arjun. He says that resigning all thy works to me, with thy consciousness filled in the self, being free from desire and egoism, fight, delivered from thy fever. And how, how this whole conversation is going on between Krishna and Arjun, and how Krishna is guiding Arjun to perform the actions and not be concerned about the consequences that those actions are going to follow, because that is not in Arjun's control. He could just surrender what is going to follow to the divine. So through this theological framework, the Gita, it reveals that true desireless action manifests not merely through psychological detachment, but through the complete surrender of both action and their consequences to the divine. And this has been mentioned in various dialogues which happens between Krishna and Arjun, that how we need to focus on, and how Arjun was asked to focus on the desireless actions and not be focused upon what results are going to follow, because we also discussed that how Bhagavad Gita emphasizes on dharma and duty. So performing an action out of one's duty is what we are ultimately supposed to do, and not be concerned and attached to the what consequences it's going to follow, because those are not in our control. What is in our control is to perform action out of our duty, or as per what our duty prescribes us. So now if we, if we talk about, we have mentioned about how the karmas of past, present and future are determining our lives in the present and how it's going to be in the future. It raises a very important question, the question of free will and freedom versus determinism. So if one of the most profound philosophical problems which is arising from the karma theory is the apparent contradiction between determinism and free will. So if our present circumstances are the inevitable result of our past actions, the karmas that we have done in the past, in what sense can we be said to possess genuine freedom or choice? Because the life that we have in the present is determined by the actions that we have done in the past. So do we really have freedom? Do we really have free will to choose, or is everything determined? So if we take the aspect of the deterministic aspect, which says that our current situation like health, wealth, mental disposition, social position, even our desires and tendencies are determined by past karmic forces beyond our present control. So it holds the idea that whatever is happening now is already determined by the past karmic forces, be it health, wealth, social positions, our mental disposition, or anything that we can think about. Those are determined by the past karmic forces. So, the freedom requirement states that the ethical responsibility and spiritual progress requires meaningful freedom of choice. Without it, moral agency would become illusory. And we know that in life, we often hold people morally accountable. We see them as moral agents. So, if we are talking about moral agency, then how can we talk about moral agency as everything is determined? So, whatever I am doing now is determined by my past karmic forces. So, how would I justify this moral agency in the present life? So, if all is determined by karmas, how can spiritual liberation be possible? If our choices are merely the playing out of past karmic trajectories, how can we be held morally responsible then? Because we are being held morally responsible for them, for what has been done in the past. So, how do we make sense of our choices? How do we make sense of the spiritual liberation? If everything is predetermined, how can we look for this kind of spiritual liberation and moral agency? So, different types of karmas have different deterministic force. So, if we talk about the prarabdha karma, which is currently manifesting, it is unavoidable, like an arrow which has already been released. Sanchit karmas, the accumulated but dormant, can be neutralized through spiritual practices. Then, if we talk about the last type of karma, which is the kriyaman or agami karma, currently being created, this is where the subject has the present choice. This model creates a balanced view where certain aspects of life are determined while others remain open to transformation. So, Sanchit and Prarabdha can be seen to be determined, while Kriyaman and the Agami karma, wherein we are currently performing an action which would which would have a consequence in the future, that is where the subject has a freedom of choice. So, the karma provides the seed. A beautiful analogy of seed has been mentioned here, that karma provides the seeds of tendencies, but present consciousness is the field determining which seeds germinate. As the Mahabharata states, just as a farmer sows various seeds, but they grow according to the nature of the soil and the climate. So, similarly, karma manifests according to the present conditions. So, what are our present conditions? The present consciousness, that is going to determine how those karmas are going to manifest. So, with this, we come to an end of our lecture on the theory of karma. And I thank you all for being there and listening to the lecture on the theory of karma. Thank you.